Welcome, everyone. This is welcome to the Ask Every Child Ms. Kendra program webinar, April 12th. And it's wonderful to have all of you join us again, where we're going to be talking about student engagement in trauma-informed education. And I want to remind you all to, as the webinar continues, to put your questions in the Q&A box, and halfway through the webinar, we'll be taking your questions. And I want to introduce to you my colleagues on the panel tonight, which is Dr. Hadar Lubin, who's the Chief Medical Officer of the Ms. Kendra programs, and Eyenga Bokamba, who is the Director of the Menlo Park Academy, an alternative high school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Welcome, both of you. And we're thrilled to have everyone here, and I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Lubin, who's going to give a short introduction to the topic, and then the panelists will have a chance to talk with each other about it from our various perspectives, and then we'll take your questions a little bit later. So to you, Hadar.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So good to be with all of you. So great to have Eyenga with us today. So as David said, we're going to take some time to really highlight the rationale for expanding trauma-informed education to the students. And I was thinking that in order to kind of get a little bit of a visual that when we look about on pyramid of health, at the top of the pyramid usually is mental health. It focuses on symptoms, on disease, and it is delivered by specialists, by mental health professionals. Below it's the public health layer that focuses on prevention, that is usually delivered by educator in the school system, that is. And at the base of the pyramid is the societal health, which focuses on social norms, and it is delivered by everyone. And when we think about the school, it will include the students. So when we are trying to really expand the trauma-informed education to the students, it makes a full sense that to reverse the pyramid and bring a lot of our effort really to its base in order to really help the students to carry the mission of understanding how trauma and toxic stress really interfere with education in general. So what will be the advantages of including the students in this trauma-informed perspective? First, I will say that really investment in societal health is really the only way to pave ways to establish new norms. A student becomes agents of change, and they can help propel societal health perspectives forward. We all agree that knowledge is power, and applying knowledge is empowerment. Empowering the student is essential to healthy personal growth and meaningful learning. So it makes full sense to really get that perspective and apply it in the school. If we do look at the core social competencies, social emotional competencies that was set by CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning, it becomes apparent that social norm changes must include everyone. It cannot be a niche or a specialized place. It has to really include everybody in society and in any given system, indeed. So when we think about the school as a small societal structure, then it has to include everyone, including the students. Let's review a little bit the core social emotional competencies that were set by CASEL. The first one is self-awareness. Example of it will be identifying emotions, accurate self-perception, self-efficacy. The second one is self-management, impulse control, stress management, self-motivation. 3, social awareness, empathy, respect for others, perspective taking. Number 4, relationship skills, the ability to communicate, social engagement, teamwork. And the 5th one is responsible decision-making, which helps to identify problems, solve the problems, reflect on it, and analyze the situation. So if those are the core social emotional competencies, let's take a minute and try to explore how really trauma and toxic stress may affect those 5 competencies that I just listed. We do know that trauma distorts self-perception. It narrows the emotional expression of the person. It's either flat or could anger or outburst. It also underscores a sense of helplessness in its core. So clearly you can see how this self-awareness is being hindered by this, by the influence of the trauma and the toxic stress. Likewise, if you think about self-management, toxic stress and heightened anxiety is explosive, it's unmodulated, it's unregulated, and it's prohibitive for stress management and self-motivation. The third one, again, social awareness, we do know that in the intensity of fear and psychic pain stands on the way of seeing the other as another person. And usually it will be, the other person will be viewed as a potential perpetrator, a possible bystander or collaborator. And that, again, interferes with the ability to be aware of other people around you. Again, the relationship skills that I mentioned is the 4th core social emotional competency is being interrupted by the maladaptive coping as a result of toxic stress and trauma. It leads to poor communication, social withdrawal, and lack of trust. And lastly, the responsible decision-making is usually interfered by saturating the natural resilience of the person, which we know already that when that occurs, it really interferes with executive functioning. So in summary, recruiting students to be informed, to be active and knowledgeable members of society early on, while they are still at school, it's a worthy investment in our societal well-being and in our societal health. So let me open it here for our panelists. You're muted, David.
Thank you very much. Eyenga, did you want to jump in, or did you,
Sure, I can jump in. Thank you so much, Dr. Lubin, for the review of Castle's extraordinary work. I am very moved by the list that you've provided for us as I review my school and I review some of the tactics that we use to get students involved in decision-making. And I was particularly struck by this idea of expanding self-perception and really taking that narrative of victim and turning it around so that the students are activated. And before I go too much into the strategies that I use, I just want to say a little bit about my school. The school's name is Menlo Park Academy. Happy to let you know that we are in our 50th year as a school. So it has longstanding relationships in the community. In fact, we have a number of students who are 2nd or 3rd generation Menlo, which is kind of amazing.
cool.
It's pretty cool, yeah. So I love the idea of looking at resiliency and the fabric of resilience of the community and building that into our school, what we're trying to do. We are a trauma-informed high school. We do consider ourselves an alternative school. We are a contract alternative within the Minneapolis Public Schools. So at any given time in our outer rings of our concentric circles of orbit, we would have about 500 students who are either have just graduated, are about to graduate, have dropped off entirely, or attending, one of those 4 boxes. So what that leaves us with is about 80 students who are in the space at the same time in any given year, working towards graduation. And because we are a credit recovery school, what we're trying to do is invite students into their own learning and the development of their interests, by really leading with those interests. So we are sort of an inquiry-based program, if you will, working within the standards, meta standards, and also moving towards deep kinds of experiential education. And all of that, if you boil it down to how that pedagogically impacts the trauma-informed work that we do, really it's about our belief that the students can and will show up as their authentic selves, who are fully statured, not only in their survival story, but in their story of thriving. And I think that that is a very crucial reality that I want to lift up with you both, as well as with our audience, because I think the assumption when we are serving students is that we don't expect them to thrive. We actually we expect them to survive. We hope that they will survive. We worry about their survival. And then that causes vicarious trauma and stress in us as staff. So rather, for my staff and for myself and my other co-administrator, my dean of students, we are trying to invite this idea of, we believe that it is not only possible, but probable that the students are going to thrive. And as such, they're going to become community leaders. So the responsible decision-making, the respect for others, the empathy, the expansion of the self-perception, those are all sort of baked in, if you will, to sort of our formula for how we work with our students. So I'll just stop there and invite any thoughts.
Great. Well, this topic got stimulated by just a number of discussions we've been having, which, we've realized that the trauma-informed education movement in the country has, been growing for maybe 20 years and has almost completely been focused on tooling up teachers in the trauma-informed perspective. And our agency and many others have gotten involved in developing professional development workshops in trauma, impact of trauma, vicarious trauma, de-escalation techniques, classroom management techniques from a trauma-informed perspective, to really help teachers and the school system understand that the kids are not being bad, but that they're responding to the stressors and the toxic stress that they've been experiencing, so that the management and the support and the mentorship and the education that they're getting will be more sensitive, not reactive, not punitive. It ties in with restorative practices, responsive classrooms, this whole movement, emotional intelligence, SEL programming, et cetera. It's all a group of approaches where we're trying to respond to the what we call the whole child. But except for a couple of exceptions, very few people have thought about informing the students about this. And I mean, giving those same professional development workshops about trauma, about the brain, the neuroscience, the trauma reaction, the overreaction, how the whole thing is, to the students, so that they fully are partners in the knowledge base of what's going on. Because, to be honest, they're managing and regulating themselves as a community. They're communicating with each other across social media, interacting directly, and opportunities for kind of communal regulation are being missed if the students have no clue that they're responding to a trauma schema rather than the annoying teacher or the trigger point that they're responding to. So in a very important effort that was documented in the movie Paper Tigers. I don't know if you've all seen that movie. Recommend you do that. An alternative high school in Washington State tried this, where they actually gave workshops to the kids in high school. They were high schools, alternative high school. And they found that it was very helpful to create a kind of a common language. The challenge, of course, is also, well, what about elementary school students, and to what degree can they take in this information? But, picking up on what both Hadar and Eyenga have said, we talk about student empowerment, we talk about democracy, we talk about their contributing to the community. Are we fully educating them around something as important as trauma? And what are the things that we need to do? And what are the barriers to why we're not doing it even more? And I was on a panel recently in the state of Connecticut where almost every one of the 250 people who got 3 minutes to speak to the legislature were saying that the demand, mental health demand on our system is huge. That is, the number of kids that need the support have gone way beyond a small percentage, and that the number of mental health professionals that we have, we don't have anywhere near what we need, and we don't have anywhere near the amount of money that would have to take to provide these mental health services for recipients of them, meaning the students. So it seems to me kind of obvious that a way around the financial burden, the workforce problem, and providing a student body that's fully involved in their own future, we need to employ the students as full collaborators, as trauma-informed interventionists in their own community with the teachers. That is, we all have to be on the same team. So I'm really interested in the kind of practical ideas that have come up around how to engage kids, get them interested if they aren't interested. I think our experience has been that many of them are interested in this topic, and so it's not a hard sell. But I mean, what would this look like? You know what I mean? What would this look like if we really started to train students in the trauma model? So I'll throw that out and see where we go with it.
Well, we have a little bit of an insight of how knowledge per se is an experience in the context of illness or distress or being overwhelmed by symptoms, let's say PTSD if it's trauma, is a part of the successful intervention. When people have a better understanding of how the trauma affecting their life, that's the base from which we will start really give them the tools to not do that in maladaptive way and find better ways to communicate and to be able to tolerate the internal experience and not interfere at the moment. And this is really based on knowledge. We've seen it with patients. As soon as they get the information, they become completely involved in really being partners to the hard work of what we call healing. And I think that if we take a societal health perspective, then it makes sense to involve everybody from the get-go. To really be equipped to understand how you can become a productive member of society. Isn't that the great outcome of thriving? If so, are they only going to become thrivers when they're adult, but not during their childhood? So I think to me, it makes sense to really invest. And also we do know that trauma, short of traumatic brain injuries, trauma does not really affect the intellect of a person or some of their capacity to understand concepts. Occasionally it does, but really using the part the so-called the perpetrator did not interfere with is very empowering for the person who is managing that. So I can see so many benefits in really recruiting students to be on that camp of let's really deal with how toxic stress, violence, trauma, perpetrators affecting our life.
Eyenga, what kind of efforts either that you've done successfully or that have been challenged to kind of inform your kids or to have them be participants in kind of a trauma lens?
Absolutely. I was going to tell a few stories about that. I think that my approach really is, it's so beautiful, everything that you're both talking about, to see that in action in a small school setting where I can't control the outcome, but I can certainly try to set it up for success. And one of the things that we do that I wanted to share with everyone has to do with asking students what it is they need when they are dysregulated, asking them to participate in the solution. And one student, we'll call her Donna, who is a very young student, one of our youngest students. She is 15 in an environment where many students are 18 or 19. Donna decided that she needed juice boxes every day, juice boxes. So I said, okay, I can't give you a juice box right now because I don't have them here, but today after work, I will go to the grocery store. I will get juice boxes. What flavor? Strawberry. Okay, got the juice boxes. The next day, she knew I had the juice boxes. We talked about it. We made a plan for when she was going to come to my office and get a juice box. And she said, I'm going to come to your office and get a juice box when I'm really upset and I just need to pound a wall, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come and talk to you and I'm going to get a juice box. I said, okay, that's great. So we did that for a couple of days. Then about a week later, she came back and I said, well, I see that you're here for a juice box, but do you think this is the last one. So do you want the juice box now or do you want to wait for it for after lunch? Because if you have it now, which you can, there just won't be any after lunch. She thought about it for a minute and she said, I'm going to come back after lunch. And it sounds like just so tiny, but that example for me, just on the day-to-day level in a school with students, trying to manage emotions, trying to help them recognize what they need to do and when they need to do it. It, for me, just felt like this huge accomplishment that this young woman decided to wait, deferred gratification, all of that, especially when you tie it to academic outcomes, right? This whole notion that when we have the younger kids, we're looking at concrete learning all the way up to graduate school and abstraction. At some point in there is high school, and you're hoping that you can make these cognitive leaps and you can actually sort of defer gratification enough to complete a huge assignment that has 20 different legs and arms, right, so to speak. So for me, I'm always making those connections about their, as you say, Dr. Lubin, like their intellectual abilities and their emotional regulation skills, and really pointing those out so that they can really thrive. And I have many stories like that, but that one comes to mind in terms of, while we're not doing a program such as the one you're talking about, with the education of the students, and I think that's beautiful, and I would like to do that. We are doing it on an individualized basis. And that so far has been working because, again, we're small enough with 100 students.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, I mean, in the Miss Kendra program, in the elementary things that we have some mantras, because we're working with kindergartners all the way up through fifth graders in the elementary program. And one of them, for example, is worries make it hard to learn, which is now called neuroscience, and basically the prefrontal cortex being interfered with by toxic stress. But for the kids, worries make it hard to learn. And the thing is, kids don't know that. And they have to link the fact that if I'm worried, it's hard for me to learn. And then, of course, we have the list of worries, which is Miss Kendra's list. So we have the list of things to worry about that are big worries, Miss Kendra worries. And so they get a chance to identify what these worries are that are connected to events. And then they realize that that's hard to learn. And then the second idea, the main idea that we're teaching them is it's not good to keep your worries to yourself, and that we want you to share your worries with a trusted friend or adult, or in our case, also Miss Kendra. And we show that in various ways. One way the most effective way has been we take the teacher who's doing the program or our staff, take an empty glass, put it on the table, pitcher of water, and ask the kids, okay, name a worry. And they name a worry, and she pours a little bit of water in the glass. Name another worry. And then there's another thing, and the glass gets fuller and fuller and fuller. And then the glass is completely full, and she keeps going and says, give me another worry. And another child gives a worry, and she pours the water in, and the water flows all over outside of the glass, spilling all over. And the kids love that, of course. But the simple point is we can only hold a certain number of worries before they spill out. And, we give the idea that we are that glass, and just the water and the tears go up and up and up. And when they get up to here, they spill out your eyes as tears. We call that crying. And that's just all the worries that are now spilling out all over the place. And the kids get that. And the result is that before you add another worry, you have to pour something out of the glass. And so she takes another glass, which is a trusted person, and you share your worry by pouring a little bit of the water into the other glass. And then she points out, if there are many glasses and you can pour the water out into many glasses, there's only a little bit of water in many glasses, and it can be held by a group of glasses. And if we have a class or a family or a community where we are sharing these worries, we can keep it from spilling out. So, I mean, that's the kind of way we're trying to communicate trauma-informed education to little kids. With the high schoolers, which of course have much more capacity, and we've just completed this yesterday and today at a large public high school here in New Haven, Wilbur Cross, 1,600 high school students in 4 groups according to their grade. We gave the same professional development workshop that we have given the teachers on trauma reaction, neuroscience, the whole thing. We gave them a cheat sheet with a kind of a summary of the key concepts and the terms, defining the terms. And our staff did a role plays where they enacted dysregulated situations that are very common for the high school students on the stage, which the kids loved it. It's another version of spilling the water. And they love that of, somebody losing it and having a highly escalated situation, and then replaying it where instead of it just the teacher becoming angry and getting into a big escalated situation, of demonstrating a different way of managing it by asking the student what's really bothering them. And we're going to be following that up in small groups, as well as other kind of psychoeducational ways. And it's like kind of puzzling, because it's like, how are the students processing that information? And we don't fully know yet. We haven't done enough of this ourselves, to be honest, to really know how students are going to metabolize this information, how it might improve or affect their interactions. But we're going to be trying this. And we're going to be trying to come up with ideas, and we'd love to have any ideas that the audience has, or examples of things where you've engaged the students in the process. One of the things that we're doing across is we've formed a cross peer counseling group, indicating for those students who are interested, most excited about this, to form and to be kind of like authorize them to be peer counselors, which means really supporting them like we would any kind of social work team or interns, anything like that. And we've been questioned about whether or not the students are capable of doing it. We've been questioned whether they can understand. We've been questioned about whether or not this will kind of unhinge forces within the high school. So we've been challenged about this, but we're going to give it a shot.
I also want to underscore, David, before we open it for the questions, is that it's so hard to usually, and particularly, of course, in high school, but to engage the family and the community in what's happening in the school. Every program would try to do it consistently, usually fails, but definitely challenged. And if you engage the student in this fashion, they become the agents of change. They go home and suddenly their knowledge is getting disseminated into the family or to the basketball court. And there is this kind of bringing the family and the community without having a program, but in having a language that is being disseminated with true knowledge. This is really based on what we know in the field of trauma and toxic stress. So I think that by educating the students, it's not only going to have an impact on the students. Of course, we don't know yet, we just started, but there is a second benefit, which is it's much more easily to disseminate this knowledge through the students to the families and society and their communities than we going to their families and to the community, which we know it's more difficult. So it's a double benefits, if you will.
I would love to just say before we open to questions, just to say that what I'm hearing underneath the amazing trainings that you've done, it sounds like just finished actually, is this assumption that students are capable, that the students are an asset, that the students are not only that they hold potential, but that they actually can do something right now. And I think it seems so straightforward. And as you present this to me, I think, of course, why not? I'm in favor. I believe, I trust the research and I believe in the results that you're sharing with us. But if you peel it back a little bit, I'm walking with this question as an educator and certainly as a director of a school. How can we have that ethos show up more often in more places and actually move from that place, believing that the students are an asset, not only in the school, but in the community and in the family, and then setting them up to be so. And I think that when I have a chance to do the exit interviews with the students who are about to graduate, one of the things that they say invariably is they felt empowered to be exactly who they are and to bring their strengths to bear for the school community. And that once they realized that that's what was being asked of them, then it was like the fire was lit in terms of expressing their passions and feeling safe about moving into their intellectual interests. So I'll just stop there. I know we want to open for questions, but to say that I really appreciate the assets-based frame as a gateway for the potentiality of lifting up the emotional intelligence of the students.
And I think it's a huge question. Having been in the schools as much as I have, I do kind of understand the challenge because, it's like this vicious cycle. The kids act very irresponsibly sometimes. And the teachers start off trying to be calm and reasonable. And then some of the kids, ignore them. So then they have to ramp it up. And then the kids hide or they fight. And then it just goes on day after day after day. And pretty soon you've got a kind of a mini police state where you've got the teachers running around basically trying to like track me, do this, don't do that, and threaten in subtle ways, various disciplinary actions. And you got the kids who are like the, you know, the fox and the hound, kind of hiding and trying to outgame the system, this kind of a thing. So they act less responsible and the teachers act more punitive, and if the whole thing goes south. And the teachers aren't making it up. I mean, they're not, you know, this is happening. But the result is, it's a shame because the kids are capable of much more, and the teachers don't have to work as hard as they are if the system was itself regulated in a more balanced way. And so how to get these particularly larger systems, but it's challenge even in the small schools. How do you get it so that there is more of a horizontal rather than vertical dynamic, you know? And I think that's really, really important. So with that, let's open it up. Katie Odell is our webmaster here, and she has been collecting questions from our audience. Katie, would you like to throw the panel a question?
Absolutely. The first question we've got is, teaching the students about trauma and toxic stress might overwhelm them. Do we want to add stress to already burdened students?
Well, I think that this is intuitively sound like something we should avoid, but it's actually counterintuitive. Knowledge actually reduces anxiety and stress because you feel that you have something that you can really, you can learn and do something about it, rather than to be the helpless victim. It's happening to me and I just kind of have nothing that I can control. And knowledge gives really, as I said before, knowledge is really power. And we all benefit from knowledge in small ways and in big ways. So why not equip the kids from the get-go with the knowledge that not only will become power for them, but also will already change the dynamic for them in the school, where they feel completely neutralized by their internal experiences, which we know interferes with their studies. So yeah, I intuitively would think, oh my God, it will stress them even more. But actually, in essence, it gives them more information to deal with it.
Yes, I would just jump in and say I completely agree. And I also want to say, to think about this in a slightly different way, which is to put on the table this idea of the invisible rules of success in any institution. And that if you are coming into the school setting from a privileged perspective of being taught what those rules of engagement are and the expectations, and you can behave accordingly, either because you're coming from a class background where you know how it is you're expected to behave, and therefore you know how to do that, or you're coming from a perspective where you've been taught how to behave so that you can code switch once you go into the school. I think from my experience as an educator, and this I realize is, I didn't say earlier, but this is my 20th year in education and my 3rd year being a director. My experience is that teaching students about the rules of engagement and giving them tools to be able to engage for longer periods of time without incident is actually really empowering, and it's really necessary. For any of us who are dealing with racially diverse communities, I find that it's essential to say out loud to the students there are rules, there are expectations for your engagement. If you behave this way, this won't work out. If you behave this way, it will work out. Here are some tools for you to behave in the ways that I expect you to behave, and to be transparent about it. Because I think what's happening in our schools is that students are being held accountable for expectations of behavior without being taught what the rules of engagement are. And therefore, it's a vicious cycle of having more students sent to the principal's office, sent out of the school, sent into punitive settings, juvenile justice, etc. And if you peel back the layers, you find out that no one ever bothered to tell them about the rules of engagement, or give them tools to be able to engage in calm ways. So thank you.
Yeah, well said. Katie, next question.
Next question. Do you think students will be interested in the topics of trauma and toxic stress?
Yes.
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 Yes and yes.
Yes, yes, and yes.
I think the good question there is, I mean, we know, I know, and I think our team knows, I think most people in the field know that the students all the way down to kindergarten are extremely interested in what is happening in their lives. So in other words, they are thankful always to be able to have a chance to talk about what is happening to them. It is the most relevant thing. It is actually what they're thinking about. And so when you engage on that level, everything becomes applicable, relevant, and important. And a good teacher is able to take their personal experience and link it to the curriculum, whether it's reading or writing or history or humanities, whatever. And so if you're going to be learning how to write, if you ask the child to write about their personal experience, they're much more motivated to learn how to write all the way up. So that I can say is, I think that's clear. The question I think implies, though, are they interested in the more conceptual level of information we have in the trauma-informed field? I think that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that exactly. I mean, we assume some will and some will not. I don't know if my other panelists have a thought about that, but I mean, I think that will vary depending on the level of abstraction that we present it at.
Right, right.
I would just jump in and second that. And we've all, said a resounding yes. And it's a wonderful question. I appreciate the question very much. I think my teachers and I are always looking for opportunities to offer relevant, developmentally appropriate curriculum. So in that, centering things on the students' lived experiences. I am based in Minneapolis. This is the epicenter of racial reckoning in this country. We have students with cameras out in the community documenting people's lived experience, and not just the trauma of it, but again, the thriving within the multiple pandemics that we have going on here. We are doing experiential education for that reason as well. Why? Because at the high school level, it is completely developmentally appropriate for students to have an opportunity to work outside of the traditional boundaries of the classroom, and to soak in this idea that the community is actually a location of deep knowledge. And some would say the indigenous knowledge that's out in the community is actually knowledge that we want to lift up and have students understand as valuable, hence building on their self-esteem and self-efficacy. So I want to just say a resounding yes to that question for sure.
I would like to jump in just in additional angle to that notion of really what would be the spectrum of the students' interest in terms of the abstraction, and that there will be people who will be interested in those who are not. I think that it is up to us to really translate the more abstract, conceptual issues. And that's not because they are kids, although of course it has to be age appropriate, but to the level of our human experience rather than as knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It needs to immediately be translated, whatever the concept is, about by usage of metaphors, by using things that they're familiar with, as a way of really highlighting our humanity in that experience, that now stress affects us as human beings. And I think that we sometimes tend to really avoid addressing really what stress and trauma and toxic stress looks like by using words that are completely disconnected from this so-called lived experience when it happened. So I think it will be up to us to really find a way to translate it in a way that will be universal in understanding, because we're all humans. We all have the same kind of, more or less the same kind of experiences and wants and fears and trepidation. So if we will be able to do that, I think that really will, probably the majority of the kids will be able to utilize it successfully the way we envision it.
Yes, and there are increasingly children's books that are trying to address aspects of this. But in terms of, it's a question of what about trauma-informed education, what should be learned? What do we want to teach? I mean, for example, one simple concept is we tend to blame the victim. Knowing that, just knowing that in an interaction where somebody is victimized, we afterwards, we tend to blame the victim. So when somebody is walking down the cafeteria with a big tray and on top of it is the spaghetti and meatballs, and someone puts their foot out and they trip and all the meatballs and the spaghetti falls on a third student, everyone laughs at the student that had all the spaghetti dump on him. And so we tend to, the trauma tends to cling to the victim. The notion of an Indian summer is a summer you cannot trust. And that has to do with the concept of Indian giver, which is basically what white people did to Indians, but we associate it with Indians rather than to white people, which is what it's all about. So it ends up being about the victim, which is that the root of bullying, for example, would be a simple, third graders can understand that. So, I mean, I think it's really a matter of kind of trying to translate what we know about trauma and increasingly find ways that young and older children can participate and learn it. Katie, next question.
We teach students about the effects of toxic stress. They might use it as an excuse when they misbehave. Am I going to help provide them with made-up excuses?
Most people that I know do whatever they can to deflect responsibility. So adults, children, or whatever. So yes, I would assume that there will be some cases of students who might say, don't get mad at me. I didn't do my homework because, I'm traumatized. So I assume that would happen. That has not been our experience as a whole in the Ms. Kendra program, to be honest, that we have not seen much of that happening. That attitude underscores what is often called the no excuses policy of particularly the reform school movement, which the idea is achievement is number one, and therefore no excuses, this kind of a thing. We're going to focus on having you do better on the test, getting the information in, and help you education. And that is all that we can do, and we're going to focus on that. That perspective of the no excuses policy is pretty much in direct competition with a trauma-informed lens. So I do think that there's a debate about that. I think it also assumes that children are evaders of responsibility, that they'll act in these ways, and we need to assume that they'll try to just lie and get out of things. Again, that hasn't been my experience about children. Some do, some lie. Do they lie more than adults do? I don't know. I don't think so. Panel.
My experience with giving information to people who've been traumatized about really how the trauma affected them in terms of how they see themselves, how they interpersonally relate to others, even how they view the world around them, is usually becoming a relief that somebody is engaging with them in the reality of their experience, and they become even more motivated to learn about it. So it kind of creates more appetite, if you will, for more knowledge about it, because it really it directly addresses what they experience that nobody else sees. And then they're being blamed of being lazy or not engaged or misbehaved and so forth. So my experience has been that there is an incredible relief about it, and it will be therefore less likely that it will be used to sabotage their own relief. You become even more more invested in really getting the information and using it correctly. It becomes kind of more precious thing, because now that I understand, I want to maintain that to be a source of information for me. So how it's going to translate in a school in terms of the wide range of kids' capacity to use knowledge, I don't know. But I think that overall there's definitely a sense of universality about us human beings benefiting from knowledge. We don't necessarily use it as an excuse, although that definitely can happen.
Yes, I'll just jump in and say I think that I agree with everything that we're discussing. I find it really fascinating. What happens every time any number of my students get tools to use and to see themselves in a new capacity? I think it's very human for us to try to see ourselves in as many different lights as possible. And I'm reflecting now specifically on the restorative justice lens around a person who is in that instance, the perpetrator, hearing from the victim how their behavior impacted them. And especially when this is peer-to-peer, how undeniable that is. You cannot dismiss the reaction, the statement from the victim, if the person is of a different generation, et cetera. In other words, what typically happens with teachers and students or administrators and students, where there's just like denial. I didn't do that. She got it wrong. That's not what I meant. That's not what I said. Da, da, da. To have two students say to each other, yes, you did say that. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. And to have both parties feel empowered enough to talk about what really happened in that transaction that got misunderstood or didn't fit with the values of the school. I think I see that being really, really powerful every time students get an opportunity to be given these tools to unpack their lived experience. And I know we keep circling back to the lived experience piece, but I think it's deeply validating. That's been my experience.
Yes, and that's because it's based on truth.
Mhm.
And when two people share what their experiences are, it's based on truth. And that's why having people be open about and talk about the events in their life is truthful. And the idea that we can go through education and just tell the students to take that part of their truth and not talk about it is a formula for failure. It's just not going to work. So my view is we have everyone talk about what's reality is, and then if somebody uses that reality for an excuse, then we address that. So you do that afterward and say, listen, you're using this as an excuse. But to use that as an argument not to address reality and to address the toxic stress and the events that are going on in the students' lives is a formula for failure. It will not work. And so I do think that in the long run, it is going to move in this direction, because I don't see any other way that there's going to be a chance for students to achieve success without it. Oh my goodness, it is 4:57 our time. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Eyenga and Hadar for joining us here with myself. And we really had a great time. I wanted to, Katie, you can put up the slide for next month, which will be May 10th, I believe, and is going to be another experiential session on stress relief and self-care for educators, conducted by our intrepid team here at Miss Kendra Programs, Aaron Webb and Alicia Stephen. We encourage you to come. It'll be a very gentle, experiential workshop for teachers and educators to be able to take a moment, learn a little bit more about stress reduction techniques for yourself, and a chance to get some of your own worries out and to feel better about what's going on. So we invite you to join us on Tuesday, May 10th, same time, same place, in a month. And again, thank you all so much for coming, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening and week. Take care.